Hello, good evening and welcome back. So as the Premier League kicks off, they kick off by taking a minute's silence for the NHS and those who have died during the coronavirus, and then pausing for 10 seconds to take a knee. Yes, all of them, various teams, every player, even the referee, take a knee for 10 seconds. Some, of course, raise their right hand because, of course, we know that Sterling spoke out not so long ago about it. And on the back of that, we've then got Dominic Raab, questions over his support for Black Lives Matter. And just before I play this clip, I'd like to point out that it seems to be that the Conservatives, both in the UK and the US, seem to have rested on the laurels despite not really achieving anything, and no longer stick up for what they believe in. And of course there is the thought that the Conservative Party, in the UK at least, don't actually have any standards. They're instead just trying to seek power and just want to be in power and will do anything for it. And this definitely gives credence to that point, because of course the incident between Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, resulting in George Floyd dying, was not because Derek Chauvin killed him. I think that's blatantly obvious by now, and you can look back through my back catalogue or other people's if you wish to go into depth about that. And Stefan Molyneux made a very poignant point, which is that yes, of course, we expect the left to twist the facts and to lie quite openly now, actually, and they're going to do whatever they can to claw and scratch their way into the lead and drag other people down, because that's what communists do, and we can't really expect anything better of them. Of course, we might think of them as ignorant, and yes, by all means, but they will do anything to push their agenda, and it has a kind of game of telephone or Chinese whispers or kind of avalanche of momentum in which there'll be something that they'll pick up on or fabricate, send that across, and this is where the whole fake news narrative comes from as well, of course, that'll then be propagated and shared far and wide. And as I think Tim Pool has mentioned, that a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth even gets out. And so, yeah, they might redact those articles or retract them if you if you're lucky. Of course, the damage has already been done, and about a tenth, maybe a fifth, if you're lucky, of the amount of people see the retraction that did the original article. At which point, the message is out, the damage is done, and there's no going back. And because, as Stefan Molyneux said, the Conservatives haven't pushed back on this, they didn't think, maybe we should wait to see what's actually happened. Maybe we should investigate into this, do some journalism, and then understand from a legal standpoint as well what should be done. Because that didn't happen, then of course the leftist, the black supremacists, have just rampaged on through, causing a lot of damage. Of course, property damage, as well as lives being lost, many hospitalizations as well, and of course several more, in fact hundreds more arrests in the process as well. It's things like this which you really need, if it's supposed to be the right wing in power, to say, okay, let's take a moment to see what's happening here. Is it actually true what is being pushed, or is it not? We need to wait for the investigation to happen, and if we then need to change the law because of it, or if this person is of course breaking the law and then we can hold them to account given the current law, then we will do so. But we're not going to resort to mob rule. That is not how a civil society functions. With that in mind, here is Dominic Raab.
Just after watching the football last night, would you take a knee if you were asked to?
Do you know what? I understand this sense of frustration and restlessness which is driving the Black Lives Matter movement. I've got to say, on this taking the knee thing, which I don't know, maybe it's got a broader history, but seems to be taken from the Game of Thrones, feels to me like a symbol of subjugation and subordination rather than one of liberation and emancipation. But I understand people feel differently about it, so it's a matter of personal choice.
So would you or wouldn't you do it?
Take the knee for two people, the Queen and the Missus, when I asked her to marry me.
Just fine.
And that's about it. So he mentions Game of Thrones there, which is kind of true. I mean, the actual origin of it seemed to just come from Colin Kaepernick not wanting to stand during the national anthem, and therefore, well, how can I protest against that if they want us to stand? Therefore, I won't stand. And he decided to kneel instead of sit down or lie down, for example. and that's where it comes from. But his point of Game of Thrones, it could either be that he really has no idea, and obviously he's supposed to be the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, but doesn't understand this foreign affair because he isn't in the culture war, and instead is more of the intellectual, academic side, instead of what's going on a cultural basis. Politics is downstream of culture, as the late great Andrew Breitbart said, of course, and therefore he might not be aware of what is further upstream. But the point of Game of Thrones is a fair point in saying that it is about subjugation and subordination instead of emancipation, because at least in British history, which of course America shares a lot of its history with Britain, seeing as we're the ones that made the country, that kneeling is subordination. It is to yield. It is to relinquish your control. It is to say, okay, I will abide by your rules and your laws, and I see that you have superiority over me, essentially, and I will serve you. The way that is still kept, of course, is in knighthood, and that's why he mentions the Queen, that if you get knighted, the idea is to serve the monarchy. That is why you kneel, you subjugate yourself in front of the crown, the reigning monarch of the time. And that is the idea. I mean, when it comes to women as well and proposing, then maybe we shouldn't throw out too many red pills too often, but it's a similar history there as well. But maybe we shouldn't go into that. So, as he says, it feels to me like a symbol of subjugation, subordination, yes. Sir Keir Starmer, of course, had to weigh in, saying that Mr. Raab was probably already living to regret his words. And unfortunately, it does seem to be the case. David Lammy weighed in, but at this point, really, who gives a shit? That, unfortunately, as I say, Raab did seem to turn back against this, because that would have been fine, to say, actually, I support what Black Lives Matter stand for, but what I and I think that they're free to protest however they wish. However, I'm not going to participate in this. It's not for me to say. And again, the problem with this is that the Conservatives are therefore granting legitimacy to a fifth column, a communist bloc within the West, within the United Kingdom, within the United States, wherever these Conservatives happen to be. And therefore, they're suggesting that, yes, actually, they do have a point, and I understand where they're coming from, and they're free to do it however they wish, despite it being in violation of the law, and of course, having no footing at all in order to make those protests, or to suggest what they're suggesting, and definitely not to take the action of which they're taking. If you want to talk about the idea of police brutality, of course, then more likely for a white person to die in police custody than a black person. And then you might say, well, yes, but it's disproportionately higher for blacks, in which case you'd say, well, it's disproportionately higher for blacks to be putting themselves in a situation where they're going to be interacting with police, especially if it's of a violent type, given that the black community, despite being about 13% of the population in the US, are still responsible for 52% of the homicides and about 50% of the violent crime there as well. In the UK, the main one to draw is, of course, London, where about it's the same for knife offences. For the national average, the black community is supposed to be about 3%, and it's close to a fifth to a quarter of the violent crime within the UK, so it only increases back up to the half to get Pareto's principle of a square root is responsible for half within London, where of course it is substantially higher. That is the statistics that we see over here. So yes, if you're breaking the law, if there's a particular group, however you wish to assign them, if they're going to go with race, we will go with race as well, play them at their own game, because they're going to lose no matter what, and therefore say, well, yes, if there's a problem with police, if it's because they're arresting people for breaking the law, and then they're using more force to detain somebody who's resisting arrest, then maybe we should look at those underlying causes. You think it's racism? Cool. And we can prove it isn't. And instead we can say, more likely to be violent and criminals, most likely due to being broken homes, single mothers in particular, the father isn't there isn't a strong role model, maybe we can fix that. And we will definitely not be subjugating ourselves to our black overlords within the UK or within the US. That is not something we will do. As the old quote goes, which has been attributed to a few different people now, is that I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And the same goes here. I'd rather die a free man than live as a slave. And I know Michael Caine mentioned that recently as well with regards to Brexit, of all things. But that is where we stand. That is where they kneel. If they wish to kneel before us, that is up to them. Maybe they don't understand what they're doing, but maybe not understanding what they're doing is why they're in this mess in the first place. For everybody else, stay safe. It's a bit disturbing, I have to say that more than I used to. But still, stay safe. And until next time, have a good one.